Good afternoon. We're back with the Manhattan Policy Forum Speaks, and our guest this afternoon is Attorney Sean Abreu. Sean is a tenants' rights attorney, and this is the beginning of our series of interviews with candidates for office for the 2021 city elections. Many people have been term limited and so will not be able to run for re-election. In this case, Mark Levine, the current city councilman for the Grant Houses area, Community Council District 7, will be term limited, and so this becomes an open seat. There are four primary candidates running at the present time. One is Attorney Abreu. A second is Dan Cohen, an affordable housing developer. Corey Ortega, who is the president of the West Side Democrats, and Marty Allen Cummings, a resident of the I would say Hamilton Heights, and a professional entertainer. So this afternoon we're going to start with Attorney Abreu, and over the next several weeks we're going to have the other three candidates in, and we're going to have them back periodically so that we get to know these guys long before we are forced to make a decision within just a 3-month period next March and April and June. All right, so Attorney Abreu, a little background. Sean is 29 years old. He's a New York and Manhattan born. He's a graduate of George Washington High School, and where is that exactly?
That's uptown on 191st and Audubon.
All right, so that's the general. Is that the Washington Heights area?
Yes, it is.
All right. He attended Columbia University, getting a degree there, and then went on to Tulane Law School, and is now back in the city practicing as a tenants' rights attorney. And you've been on the program before discussing right to counsel legislation and how you can access that to help you if you have a tenant dispute with your landlord. He's currently working as with the NYLAG, which is, what does NYLAG stand for?
New York Legal Assistance Group.
And they are, that particular group specializes in assisting clients who are eligible for the tenants' rights to counsel benefits. So we're going to begin by asking him, and I point out as well, our call letters are 95.9 FM. 95.9 FM. You can see us on the website at ghcr.nyc, and also YouTube live streaming at YouTube Live at Grant. So, and the YouTube channel will also will post this so that you can review this at a later time, or refer your friends to look at it as well. So I guess the first question I always ask someone who's running for office: why do you want to run?
That's a very, very good question. Before I begin, I would like to thank Grant Houses Community Radio and Manhattan Policy Forum Speaks for having me. Look, I'll tell you why I'm running, Dr. LaFond. While our city has made significant strides in doing a lot for our kids, for example, with expanding universal pre-K, in many ways we have failed our kids. We really have. I was born and raised in Washington Heights. I failed the 4th grade, and a lot of that had to do because we didn't have the significant resources available so that kids can realize their full potential, understand that they can make an impact in our community, realize their full potential in terms of their academics in order that they get jobs that are promising. And for me, it is just so important that we provide after-school programs for our kids throughout the city, and especially for kids in NYCHA. Kids in NYCHA, if they have after-school programs, we will see violence being reduced. We will see kids getting into schools and getting into colleges, And for me, that's just so important. Another reason why I'm running, besides expanding after-school programs, is that a lot of our families in this neighborhood are being squeezed out. Rent prices are skyrocketing. When I was a young boy in this neighborhood, my family was evicted. And that's why I'm a housing attorney, because I want to make sure that no family is left behind without an attorney, that they're not dealing with the emotional and concrete burdens without the help of an attorney, and that they have someone who can guide them through eviction trauma. The traumas of litigation are stifling, and we need to be there for them during these difficult times. And so I want to expand right to counsel, and a lot of this stems from my experiences, but also the experiences of my peers and neighbors. I walk down the street, and a lady tells me, Sean, you know what, I'm being priced out, the rent is too high, what do I do? And these are discussions that really propel me to run for City Council District 7, and also because I know I'll be the most effective leader in bringing results for our district.
Well, thank you for that response. We'll get into the details of your platform and different issues you want to address. But I've spoken to you before, and it seems to me that there's a style with you that's a bit different from most candidates that we see in politics today, and that is you seem to be looking for bringing people together, as opposed to we want to see less division. You know, it's not this politics of anger and grievance and division that we're finding. We see it every day from Washington, and it's often used in local politics to create enemies between people in the neighborhood. And you're very different in that regard. People ask what we really need to do is that I've heard you say this before. We need to come together as a community and work together to solve our problems and meet the challenges of the 21st century. We're not going to be able to do this with one particular segment or another. And I would like you to expand on that a little bit.
For sure, Dr. Lafont. Look, I've been very fortunate to being exposed to very diverse communities. You know, I went to Columbia University. I met people there from all over the world with very privileged backgrounds. I met a lot of kids there with under-resourced and underprivileged backgrounds. I've also grew up in Washington Heights. I've worked at the New York Public Library on 113th Street in Morningside Heights. I mean, this is the most diverse. It's one of the most diverse, if not my most diverse district in New York City. And I think that the leader taking this position requires to be able to know how to handle diverse backgrounds. And I think that my experiences reflect my ability to get along with everyone. And the politics of exclusion is the politics of the past. I will never run a campaign based off of exclusion. Everyone works together. Everyone has great ideas. And we're going to have, it's the marketplace of ideas, as John Stuart Mill said, right? And so we're going to have this discussion.
Well, I think that your own story, your upbringing, the background you've had, definitely underlines the importance of the fact that there is so much that's good about America, where we've had this challenges for sure, but your parents come to the United States, they're being evicted, and you're failing school at 4, but then the school system did well for you, and people were there to extend a helping hand, and the people were there to help you continue. So what I'm trying to say is maybe we should emphasize what we all have in common and what we share that's outstanding about this place that we live, in this country that we live, and just continue to work together to try to improve things. So, as I said, there's no place you're going to find, and I think you pointed out to it beautifully on the point about diversity, there's no place as welcoming or as diverse as the United States of America, and New York City in particular. It's diverse in its people, just as your parents are from the Dominican Republic. My grandparents came from Portugal and Quebec, Canada. My wife's came from Russia and Poland. Where are you going to find a place with all these different people together? So many different cultures. Its geography is diverse. The country's enormous. We have wonderful resources. It's a beautiful place. So different, but at the same time so united by common cause, by common values, and you, in many ways, you embody that for the next generation. So I really would like to encourage you to continue to reach out to everyone and have everyone with a place at the table. Basically, as Senator Brian Benjamin was telling me the other day about some issues with bail reform that haven't worked out so well, it would be good to have the people who live with the consequences of government policy and laws and regulations to be at the table when this is being discussed, and to help drive the car instead of having just to live with it by a few people who aren't talking to anybody else. And I think that's a very big problem we have right now, that we don't value. It's one thing to say that you value diversity, but it's one thing entirely, again, to actually do something with it.
Correct.
You only show your value, if you value something, if you engage it, if you invest time in it, and you use it. So that's one thing that's been very impressive about you.
Thank you.
So let's ask the questions now about what I would consider the 6 major areas that are impacting our area. You've touched on the first one, which is housing. Housing, of course, as you know, we're going through changes, which are both good and bad. We're seeing a lot of investment in our neighborhoods. We're seeing people moving in who want to build new things, get a mortgage and buy a condo and invest in the neighborhood. But on the other hand, it's been very disruptive, and some people may be left behind or out of the, forced out. So I know that you're interested in an inclusive housing plan. Could you tell us a little bit about what your attitudes are about that?
Sure. It's important to obviously continue expanding affordable housing in our neighborhood. It's tremendous. We need to continue to I will be radical for tenant rights. I wrote an op-ed in December, for example, calling for the city to expand the free legal services for tenants to be able to sue their landlords when they fail to make basic repairs for the most serious violations after HPD has issued Class B, Class C violations. We're talking about no mold, no hot water, mold and no heat, etc. So radical tenant rights, but also it's important to understand that, this city is, the city's makeup is also made up of mom and pop homeowners and middle class families who are also feeling left out of this discussion. So I'm all for folks who live in homes throughout the city, but particular middle class and low income homeowners.
Right. You, as you know, Walter South is on Community Board 9 and has done a lot of work was here last week talking about some of his ideas about affordable housing. And
just to add, this is a discussion that, I don't know all the answers. Neither does you, right? And so I'm going to make sure I go through the district, that I'm hearing what people's concerns are, what solutions they see we can implement. And so I'm concerned for, tenants that are being priced out. I'm also concerned for the middle-income class homeowner in our district who can't pay their mortgage anymore because of the increasing property taxes. This is, this will be the people's platform. And that is my priority. This is going to be the people's platform. And as we move forward on this campaign, policies are going to be developed and people will take ownership of their ideas as they should. And this is what my campaign will be about.
Walter has been revolutionary in his ideas about integrating economic status. In other words, not just having an 80-20, where it's 20% people who are really disadvantaged and 80% who are incredibly wealthy. So looking for developments that are going to bring in working people, middle-class professional people who all want to be part of our cities, that give us that diversity we need, so there isn't a great we only have very rich and very poor. So that doesn't just happen by accident. So you guys, who get elected, have to help us with that.
We'll certainly work on that. I can promise I'll certainly work on that.
Right, excellent. So don't worry, we're going to hold you to it. So
as you should.
The next one is safety. Safety has to do more with criminal activity and so forth. But I would point out that safety in our communities is very tied to education. Because right now, we don't really have a huge crime problem and hordes of people coming from other places or adults causing problems. We have a lot of youth violence, youth and gang violence that's popping up. That has a lot to do with education and opportunities for young people.
No, absolutely, Dr. Rafon. Look, there's a persistent lack of youth programming in our neighborhood. You know, kids get out of school at 3 p.m. What are they doing from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. while their parents are at work? We have to reduce availability to crime, reduce availability to bad peer groups, but also, aside from reducing availability, we need more after-school programs so that kids can be excited about their education, you know, perhaps get involved in sports, and have something to look forward to after school along with their peers and doing right by their neighborhoods. And that's why I want to focus on making sure that NYCHA, I want to implement a NYCHA after-school program. I don't know exactly the logistics and how that would look and how we're going to pay for it, but I know the result. I know that we want to work on this, and if we have NYCHA after-school programs, I think that would significantly reduce crime in our neighborhood by a huge margin. And it's been proven in other in places in the United States. And so we also have to focus on how we're going to take care of the incarcerated through NYCHA's Family Reentry Program, making sure we're making best use of that. And you know, the city last week called for, I think it was Gail Brewer, the Manhattan Borough President, called for more social workers in our schools. I fully support that. I think that when kids have access to social workers and their social service workers in the schools, that would help them navigate emotional traumas, help them navigate, their family circumstances. But I think we can go even further. I think that schools should have psychologists and therapists on staff as well. And of course, this is something that's evolving, and we're going to talk about more the specifics of those proposals in the next coming months once we have meaningful discussions with key stakeholders of the neighborhood.
Now, tell me, I've spoken to a few technology people who are from the neighborhood, and they're very interested in the possibility of STEM jobs. Now, because you don't want everybody, it's nice to get people used to working, so you can obviously, and there's nothing against the McDonald's Corporation or the things that it does, but we want to be able to have those programs after school, or, we're talking about people going into the teenage years, where we can be putting people into exposing them to potential STEM jobs. Is there any interest in that?
No, that is brilliant. And of course, when I mention universal after-school programs, we want to make sure that we have subjects ranging from STEM to music to artistic experiences, artistic subject matters, and so absolutely, I think that in many ways tech is the future. We all know that. There are programs like girls that code. There's programs that teach you how to code for free online. It's available, but we need to make sure that we have, for folks who can't learn these softwares online on their own, we need to have teachers in the classroom and teachers in these after-school programs to explain what coding is, explain these softwares and how they work. And hopefully in turn, this will enable kids in our neighborhood to land jobs in STEM, working for Google and staying in their neighborhoods once they land these jobs so that we can have our community stay intact.
Well, I think that what you're touching on is that many times there are wonderful programs available, both in the public schools and elsewhere. And the problem is that people just don't know about these programs. There's a huge constellation of them, but nobody knows how to route them there. And many times it's the same thing with the school system. They have different programs, even, for example, taking the Regents exams, but nobody knows that those programs are available. So how can we make sure that the kids know that they're available and the parents as well?
Right. Well, first, we need to make sure that we focus on partnerships, right? I participated in the Double Discovery Center program when I was at Columbia, and one thing that they were very good at was making sure that kids got their education, that kids knew about these programs at their high schools. So it's important that the programs that are based out of our neighborhoods, that they're actually doing some significant outreach. And that's going to be important. That Community Board 9, Community Board 7, Community Board 12 is doing outreach. And outreach is key. But even then, right, even when the outreach has been successful, there's programs that are under capacity and can't reach everybody because they can't take everyone. And that is what we have to work on as well, making sure that programs have the capacity, the logistics, and the resources to reach these kids and provide them with an education of amazing quality.
Well, I think that perhaps there's something when you touch on community board and you talk about community involvement, many times the people who are appointed to the community board, they're making major decisions about zoning, liquor licenses, commerce, etc. Nobody knows who the hell they are. Nobody even knows what a community board is.
And
it's
so
important to redefine their role to be much more educational and getting people to know about what's available. And in one of these areas would be for these types of programs.
That's why, I have collaborated with Robert Hurt, Rabbi Robert Hurt. He is the director of Civic Spirit, or I believe he's the founder of Civic Spirit, and a program that's designed to bring civics education citywide so that kids know the role that local politics play in their lives, to know the role and understand the role that civics education play in their lives. What does the community board do? What does the youth and education committee chair does? What does the chairman of housing does? What is the legislative jurisdiction of the city, of the state, of the National Congress? And so they in turn can get involved with their local communities and become leaders of the future.
Well, I think the important thing, too, is that if they want to know, if they don't know what these organizations are, and I will be honest with you, having run the forum, founded and run this forum for 7 years now, that our major goal is, of course, civics education and engagement.
Absolutely.
But the problem we keep running into is that and I know that this will be a political hot potato for you, you don't have to take it, but many of our members of our political establishment really are not interested in letting people know what's going on. They don't want people to know about a community board. They don't want people to know where to go to know how to pull the levers of government to get what they need. They would prefer to keep people essentially passive. And it's much, much easier. Believe me, it's much easier for people to have involvement in the local government than they actually realize. I want to find out from you, are you going to pledge to make sure that these organizations like the Community Board and your office, if you should get to be elected, will make sure that the people in the community are educated about what their options are with dealing with the local government?
That's an easy pledge for me, absolutely. We want people to be in the know. That makes us better and stronger. Exclusive politics to maintain incumbency, that's politics of the past, and it's never something my campaign will subscribe to. But it's important to have folks active, even if it means that someone will run against me one day. That's great. That's what democracy is about. And that's something that I will always fight to preserve, is to make sure that the levers of change are given its teeth, but that we're also opening up other young people to get involved, even if it means that we disagree.
Well, look, I will tell you one thing, which is, of course, a personal issue, that we often get criticized by these ladies and gentlemen by claiming that despite the fact that the forum now streams to 6,000 people every month, despite the fact that we will field a force of people who are politically engaged now, who will go out and support the candidates of their choice by petitioning and campaigning for them to the tune of 6,000 to 8,000 signatures every time we have an election cycle, they'll still come back and say all they are is a bunch of people who can get petition signatures, but they don't have any real influence on anything. What's your opinion about that?
Well, we know what the forum does, and we are more than just petition gatherers. We talk about policies that are going to affect the trajectory of our city. We have forums every month where people from the community come in and they voice their concerns, and we listen to them. And that is what we're about, and that is something that we continue to engage with. And just let people say what they say, but at the end of the day, we know what we're about.
Now, on education, one other point I wanted to bring up is that there's often an issue about the topic of school choice, which can become quite controversial. But the best thing that I can put forward is I grew up in a small town in Illinois, Pekin, Illinois, outside of Peoria, and there seems to be no appetite in places like that for school choice. They're happy with the school system as it exists.
Right.
They have, because they have input into the school system. They have small school boards. They're elected. If they're not parents don't like what's going on, the parents can change it. So they don't really need a school choice program. In New York, I think the attraction to school choice is there because there's, the school system itself has not been responsive, or the politicians have not been responsive to what people's concerns are. Do you think that you can do something to make it so that the school system is so fabulous that nobody wants, even if you have a school choice, they'll always choose the public school?
Can you rephrase that question?
In other words, if you want to make school choice an irrelevancy, the point is make the school system so attractive nobody wants to go to anything else.
Right, and I mean, I'm in favor of school choice. I think it's important for. I'm not going to tell parents where they should send their kids, to school.
Right.
But I also understand that public schools are very important to the fabric of our communities, and there are a lot of great public schools that are very good for kids in our neighborhood. I went to public schools. Mm-hmm. I went to George Washington High School. I attended Crossroads at PS 165. I attended Duke Ellington School PS4 on 160th Street. Mm-hmm. I went to 3 different schools in this neighborhood that were public schools, but I also went to Columbia, which is a private school. I've seen a little bit of both in both worlds, and I think that it depends on the student, it depends on the parents' needs, the students' needs, and there needs to be an evolving discussion of how these schools are going to coexist and serve our kids in the future.
Well, even if it's an issue of school choice, my question is, put the school choice aside for a moment. Why don't we work on making the menu of offerings from the public school system? It's an enormous system. You have, 1 million students in it, something of that sort. Why can't we make a program that's got a smorgasbord of great programs and make sure the kids get funneled into them so they don't need a school choice?
We'll have evolving discussions on this. This is a very big topic to tackle. And so I'm going to as I said earlier, I'm going to make sure that we incorporate stakeholders in the education field, in the education community, and folks who, parents who have kids in charter schools, parents who have kids in public schools. And as we said earlier, we're going to listen to the people and make sure this is the people's platform.
Well, now we'll move on to the economic dimensions of life in the city. And that is now point number 4, which is what I call jobs and shared prosperity. That certainly is a jobs area, but it's important. But we also have to think about people who, like the cab driver that took me over here today, who owns his own cab and has his own business, or as people who have storefronts that we all like to patronize, or people who have restaurants. What are we doing to expand? Do you have any ideas on how to create an environment that's more conducive to job growth in the city?
Yeah, I think that our city council just has to have the political will to actually make some meaningful reform. I mean, look, I think as we discussed earlier, we have to focus on STEM and jobs for the future. We have to focus on, as we said with students, not every student would fit for this kind of program. Same with jobs. Not everyone's going to be a software engineer, right? So we also need to make sure we're focusing on tradesmen and trades jobs, and we're providing the skill sets for these workers to enter the the labor force. And to your point about cab driver, I mean, I had a client in housing court, and this client fell behind on his rent because he had lost his medallion. He lost his medallion, foreclosed the medallion because of, honestly, Uber and Lyft put them out of business. Right. And the medallions were just so inflated in value that when we saw Lyft and Uber come along, it's when everybody realized just how inflated the value was when folks were losing their medallions. And so that is just, we have to make sure that we're there for our taxi drivers who are losing their jobs as well because of competition. Mm-hmm. And as much as we invite competition can also be very hurtful. But that's a capitalist economy. But doesn't mean that government can't step in and help out those who are in need. Well, and so, as to your point earlier as well about storefronts, I mean, we just saw Fairway in the Upper West Side. It's going to be filing for bankruptcy soon. And there are restaurants like in Washington Heights, like Margot Restaurant, an amazing Dominican restaurant in Washington Heights that came out of business a few years ago. And so, there have been legislation in the city council calling for, I believe it's called vacancy decontrol for small businesses, where you can't have a business closed for, let's say, a period of more than a year.
Oh, I understand what you mean. The vacancy abatement. Yeah.
The vacancy abatement. So what happens is you have a lot of these small businesses, and the landlord waits for all of them, right, to be vacated at the same time so then they can put in a big box store. This is not what New York City is about. New York City is about our small businesses, our hardware stores, our restaurants, right? They're just different varieties.
Well, I think that, but the point being that, which is leading to something that is a pet project. The vacancy write-off was put in the 70s because we had people abandoning properties throughout the city because of taxes, and they thought, well, if they don't have the tax burden because they don't have a tenant right now, we'll give them some relief so that they don't abandon the property. We are long, 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 long beyond that. I think that was probably even before you were born when that came in.
That would be an accurate statement. Yeah. It was the 1970s.
So back with disco balls. All right, so the point is, now what happens is it basically subsidizes vacancy. So people can afford to keep it open because they're not paying the taxes to the city. And so what happens in that case is it puts the thumb on the scale for the landlord
to rent it out to small businesses.
Right, because they will hold out longer and wait for something better to come along, and they don't have to deal with paying the bills. We keep asking them to change that. Apparently, from Senator Benjamin, we understand that is has something to do with the state. But I do think that the
city council can
have something to do with that.
Yeah, they could do something to do with it, with penalties especially.
Now, that's a case of something where the law was well-intentioned, but it results in something that people hadn't anticipated. So that's why I'm asking for something. We have environmental impact statements. I think it's very important that we have to look at economic impact statements and what's it going to do to local businesses. When we put in a piece of legislation or regulation, what's it going to do to the local economy? Because, frankly, we don't do that. Well-intentioned people end up chasing business away. So we need to have a diversified economic base so that we can have a diversified income distribution for people in the city. What is there for working people?
That's right.
So
what's in it for our working people?
Well, what are you going to be? A strictly service economy? So we're going to be all lawyers like yourself, making a fortune.
Making a fortune.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And financiers, or we're going to have people who are turning down beds at the Motel 6. The problem is that this does not result in a healthy economic environment. So I'm interested in looking at, and I find it very interesting, there's plenty of help for high-end service developments. Hudson Yards, for example. Been there lately? Neiman Marcus, everything's glittering in gold. You can't afford to buy a can of soup there. That's all been developed. All kinds of government help. No help for that's for
that mom and pop.
Yeah,
right?
There's nothing. What about the rest of it? And what about other businesses? Just not a high-low service economy. What about construction, manufacturing, warehousing, transportation, food service and production, electronics? And then you can buy low. We have a powerful economy here. We have 8 million people here and a huge government. Why not buy local? Why not try to encourage people to move into the city to make, I don't know, assemble computers?
And we have 5,000 residents here in Grant alone.
Exactly.
So,
all looking for jobs. Who would be happy to take those jobs?
Absolutely.
So that's why I want to find out. Maybe you should think about having a business roundtable of the local businesses and other people who might be attracted to our once people, if you should happen to get into office, so you keep your lines of communication open, so we know what we need for the employment sector.
I think that's going to be part of the People's Platform for sure.
All right, terrific. Boy, this is a great interview. All right, so let's make it. I think the important thing is shared prosperity. If you have a very diversified and balanced economy, it's much easier to have shared prosperity. The middle class is taken care of. If you have only a high-low service economy, it's almost impossible. All right. Then finally, we have two more. Transit. Transit's a big issue. Transit is, as you know, we just lost Mr. Byford, who's as the chair of the president or the chair of the MTA. They let him go, and we need help with that. Think about it for a moment. We have bike lanes, we have road channelization, we have parking issues. We need ADA accessibility to the subways, which we've been waiting for 30 years. What are, light rail, busways, and then on top of it, congestion, which has all resulted from this. It's a complicated mesh of different modes. You change one, you impacts another. You put in a bike lane, you take out a lane of traffic, it causes congestion. The congestion causes the buses to run late, so then the bus system deteriorates. It's not a simple answer. So I'm not going to put you on the spot to come up with, get your degree in transportation engineering and come up with the answer. But I do think that we need a multi-layer government and community roundtable on this to try to integrate some of the complexities of this and balance them out. We spoke about that at a forum 2 years ago. We got a commitment out of everybody from the federal representative on down to the local councilman, and nothing ever came to it. Everybody said it was a great idea, and they never did it. And it's important. What happens is there's federal money available, there's state money available, there's city money available, but we have to integrate that together to try to figure out what's going to work in a balanced way for our community, and it's complicated. So is that something that would interest you?
A discussion on
trying to set that up so that you've got maybe you get the two federal electeds that are from your district.
Right. No, absolutely. I think that
the state people, et cetera.
Yeah, that's also, and I think that as part of that discussion, we should also have residents from the district, right, but also leaders at every state level, because the federal might be in charge for certain kind of improvements that we can't at the city level,
right,
have decisions over. But if we unite our issues and we narrow and identify what the transit issues are, then we can work in tandem,
right,
to achieve a shared, outcome that we all think we should see. But to your point earlier, Dr. LaFond, I think that the resignation of Byford is actually a big loss for our city.
Right.
I think that we've seen how much better our transportation has improved over the past year. So the immediate concern is how his absence is going to actually affect things at the MTA. All right. And so I'm hoping that the city moves fast to or rather, the state moves fast to bring in the new MTA chief. Mm-hmm. That's going to we need to move fast, but I'm hoping that Byford will at least be part of that process. But that's outside of our decision making. But yes, I think that it's important for us to have a discussion on equitable transit.
Yeah.
Equitable transit is very important. Why isn't 96th Street on the 96th Street train station on the A line and the C and the B line? Why isn't that ADA accessible?
And you know that Senator Benjamin extracted funds in the state budget for that, and the MTA refuses to actually take the money and do it.
Well, listen, I've been talking to folks out in Park West Village, 400 Central Park West, 392, 382, 372. You mentioned all the twos in Park West Village. We have heard concerns of not having ADA accessible elevators, right? We have a lot of folks on wheelchairs, you know, the senior folks in the senior community. We can't forget about them.
Right.
And so I've also heard a lot of concerns about, you know, bike lanes in our neighborhoods as well. I think that bike lanes are important to you know, important to reduce congestion, have transportation alternatives. But my concern, Dr. LaFawn, is how far are we going to go? Are we going to have bike lanes in our living rooms? That is a concern that residents in Park West Village have, that residents in Manhattan Valley have, and also residents in West Harlem, Hamilton Heights, and Washington Heights. If you go onto the street, you realize that there are a lot of bike lanes that are just not being used. And so that's a concern that I have. I'm not anti-bike lanes, but I can tell you this, how far are we going to take this? And so we have to ask very important questions as a city. Are we going to be a non-car city entirely? Are we going to be, what kind of commuter city are we going to be? And then once we figure out what kind of city we want to be, then we figure out policies that will help achieve that result. So that's something that, it's something that I've heard folks concerned about, and I think that we need to have a discussion as part of that.
Well, I think it's important, once again, if you get all the stakeholders at the table and the people have to live with the consequences of this, and you believe in representative and democratic government, then we can try to balance all of those, because not everyone can have a bike lane. But then again, because it impacts parking, which is, by the way, an economic issue with some people, they can't afford to go and get reserved indoor parking. They don't have the money for it, but they may very well need a car for a variety of reasons.
And that brings us to residential parking permits and things like that.
Right.
And I think I would obviously first like to figure out I'll tell you what I think. I think residential parking would be good for our neighborhoods. But obviously we need to make sure that, again, what kind of city do we want, right? Are we going to exclude people, from outside boroughs because they don't live in our neighborhoods? We have to figure out what kind of city we want to be. But I think residential parking permits is something that sounds very fascinating. I think it would be a positive, but I don't know exactly how I would go about implementing that, and that's why we're launching the People's Platform.
Well, I think the main concern that a lot of people have had is that it starts with the best of intentions to make sure that the people who live here can actually park somewhere nearby. But then what happens is if the fees become exorbitant, then it just becomes another
ticket.
tax.
It's another ticket. It's another...
Yeah, it's one big ticket you get once a year.
Right.
And it can be very excluding to people.
Exonerous. Yeah.
Right. So...
And onerous, sorry.
And so what I think is going to happen is that obviously we need to revisit this, but I'm just urging you to please try to have an inclusive transit policy that takes into account different types of people and their different needs, because we're having a great many older citizens. And by the way, it turns out that the bicyclists don't like the bike lane either, because we've interviewed over 100 of them, and what we find is they find them dangerous. They don't know if someone's going to walk out in front of them at any moment, and they're a little concerned about it. So,
well, look, I'm sure there are bicyclists that hate it, bicyclists that love it, but this is going to be a discussion that we're going to have in the future. And I know that a lot of the seniors in Park West Village are very worried for their own safety, and rightfully so.
Well, there was a woman on 6th Avenue a little over a year ago who was a 67-year-old woman. She was crossing the street in the crosswalk with the light and was hit by a bicyclist who ran the light and killed her. So that can happen. Let's wrap up on the last area, which is environment. Environment deals, we've all been, now whether you think climate change is man-made or not, or whether we can affect it or not locally, that's another issue. But we can certainly be prepared for it by looking for zoning changes, or don't do construction for the types of construction you do, or where, hardening key infrastructure, bridges, roads, subways, etc. Utilities very important too. What can you do are you interested in doing something along these lines and helping us prepare for potential changes in climate?
For sure. I'll start by saying that I used to serve as a legal intern with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Mm-hmm. Gave me exposure to a lot of the issues, environmental issues affecting our city. And so I think that the city has taken significant steps in changing the Department of Building Codes to reduce, the biggest source of carbon dioxide in our city is from buildings.
Right.
And so we have to make sure that we're continuously modifying the building codes to make sure that we reduce carbon dioxide exposure. We also, another thing that I'm really, that I've really started talking to stakeholders about is perhaps city can provide, subsidy for construction companies to use certain building materials that would reduce exposure to certain hazardous conditions, which might be expensive, and we don't want to, disincentivize entirely construction companies from doing construction, which is very important, but we want to create an incentive just right such that they can provide construction materials that will be healthy for New York City residents.
Well, I think the thing that I'm concerned about is not so much, we're doing a good job on the construction materials and making things a little more efficient. But what I am more concerned about is hardening the infrastructure so that if you should have just another foot of sea level, like we did with Sandy, and suddenly the number 1 train tunnels are flooded, there are easy ways to harden that infrastructure to anticipate that. So that's what I don't see any movement on it.
And no, that's all right. That's a more specific question. And no, I mean, look, we have seen 2 water breaks in our subways in the past week alone. Mm-hmm. We saw the 1 train flood recently, and now recently right in our backyard on 103rd Street in Century Park West. I mean, it keeps going back to the discussion on transit issues, which is it's rusty materials we've been using, and they're not, there's a lot of wear and tear, and we have to make infrastructure investment so that and it obviously also is related to environment.
Well, and
so
what you're also pointing out too is it's also utilities investment in that infrastructure. The pipes are over 100 years old. That's why they fail when we get a freeze and thaw cycle. Or what happens when the electricity is especially not so much in Manhattan, but in other boroughs, it's a real problem. The electrical grid is also at risk. So we need to be looking at that kind of infrastructure as well. But I do think that we have to be looking at, I tend to be a very practical engineering type. I don't know if climate change is caused by man. I don't know if it's caused because it's just the natural climate change of the planet over time. I don't know. What I do know is it's changing. So what can I do about it? And that's where I'm coming down with what can we do about hardening our infrastructure so that we're prepared for it and we don't have houses that are going to be underwater, or if we just have a 1-foot rise in the bay level that we end up knocking out our entire transit system. So those things we can anticipate, and we certainly have control over that.
Right, and obviously I think there are a lot of folks, that want to achieve these outcomes. It's about how we establish priorities when we get to the council, and of course, how we're going to pay for it, and that's something that we're going to be discussing as part of the People's Platform in the next few months. Thank you so much, Dr. LaFawn, for this interview. And I would like to thank Grant Houses Community Radio, as well as Manhattan Policy Forum Speaks, and as, of course, Doug, who runs this amazing radio program. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Doug always makes us sound good, So, once again, thank you for coming. That's Manhattan Policy Forum Speaks. Remember, the business of government is policy, and if you want to find out what's going on with policy around here, then tune in to Manhattan Policy Forum Speaks at GHCR Radio 95.9 FM.
Don't forget to mention the YouTube.
Oh, yes.
Norm,
well, you can do that.
Well, you're going to be on YouTube live at YouTube. You'll be able to catch the attorney and Dr. Norm. and our very lovely assistant in the back.
Yes.
Thank you.
What's our assistant?
Audrey Isaacs.
Audrey Isaacs.
The
Thank
great
you,
Audrey.
Also
Thank you, Audrey
another
Isaacs.
attorney and my
All right.
wife.
Okay. So you're in your best behavior.
Yes, absolutely.
He's the assistant. All right.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
All right.
I'm a mere functionary.
Okay,
All right,
guys.
sir.
Okay.
All right, have a great day.
Okay.
We'll be back next week.
Stop.
We're going to be back next week with candidate for borough president, Mr. Ben Kalos,
Oh, great.
is the councilman for the east side and the Lenox Hill area. All right, thank you.